One of the things I've come to appreciate as a parent, especially when I had young children, was being asked these really difficult questions. Not usually a theological question, but just some practical questions about Christmas that do not always make sense to a child. But I'll never forget when I asked my parents to explain to me, as we lived in South Florida, how it was that even though we didn't have a chimney, that Santa was going to get in our house. There was some thought there. As you could see, the wheels were turning between both of them. And they said, well, you see, Alex, he shrinks down very, very, very small, and he goes into the keyhole and then gets very, very, very big. And I go, okay. But we have a screen door in the front, and there's no keyhole there. He says, well, he gets even smaller than that to get through the screen. At the end, they just said, it's a mystery. Just embrace the mystery. And so tonight, as we come into this evening on the vigil of Christ's birth, of celebrating that wonderful night, let's just take a moment to realize that we don't understand it all. We don't fully comprehend how this evening occurred or what it means. But that does not mean that we cannot appreciate it. It does not mean that we cannot live into it as Christians. Because at least for me, the mystery is half the fun. But the question that I think, the theological question that we're charged with tonight, comes from the reading from Isaiah, talking about that the people in darkness have seen a great light. And then we're going to see later on that John will describe in his gospel, right at the beginning, that Jesus is the light of the world. That he is the light that has come into the world to cast away the darkness. Now, once again, I'm not entirely sure how Jesus does that. I'm not entirely sure what it means that he's the light of the world. But I can begin to grasp and put together a little bit about how the idea of darkness and light are changed forever because of Jesus coming into the world. When we think of darkness, we think of outside, and if you look outside, because of that change in time, it looks like it's midnight outside. You know, when we turned out all the lights inside the church, we had this idea of darkness and these small lights in front of us. But the kind of darkness that we're talking about in the Gospel of John is the darkness that's found in people's hearts. And this is a time of year that can be very difficult for us because we realize that there's darkness all around us and that there's also some darkness inside of us as well. It could be some real pain that we're going through right now. Someone whom we love who we have lost. Maybe an ailment that has struck us. Or the fact that we're not near our family this time of year when we desperately want to be. Or also, during Advent, we were asked to examine our consciences and kind of look in those basements and attics and garages of our hearts and find those places where God hasn't been shining very much. And now, we begin to see exactly why Christ himself came into the world to be the light. Because now our idea of light is also completely changed. When we think of light, we think of a candle or a light bulb. If you're my generation, you think of like an LED. But this is so much brighter than any of that. The only example that I can give that really changed my fundamental idea of darkness and light was when I was about 9 or 10 years old, or earlier than that, my parents decided that we were going to have a white Christmas in the Dominican Republic. So I think what they meant by that was a white sand Christmas, not a white snow Christmas. And so we went down there, and there were so many things to see. I'd never been there before. And there were family members I had never met, and a grandmother who I always loved to see but never get a chance to see enough. And wouldn't you know it, because of the times in which the island was living, right on Christmas Eve, a blackout. Now, nobody blinked, except for me, because, I grew up in South Florida, and I hadn't really experienced a hurricane or anything yet, so I'd never actually been in a blackout. I didn't know all the lights could go out unless you turned them off. And so I just kind of sat there, frozen, wondering, well, now what? Is Christmas canceled? I looked outside the door, and it's like someone had turned the lights out on the world. Not even the stars were out. And then, from the corner of my eye, I saw one single light come into the room. It was my grandmother holding a kerosene lamp. And she put it on the front table right there, and we all just kind of sat and had our time together there. I could kind of make out people's faces. It was easier to hear them. But there was light. And I felt safe. And what I want to tell all of us tonight is that the light that I saw there, magnified to infinity, is the light of Jesus Christ coming into the world. Because there are people who are stuck in darkness, who just don't have any idea what to do. They're stuck. And then all of a sudden, in comes this light that's so bright, it blinds them, it blows out their retinas. And that's the light that's coming into the world and has come into the world tonight. So what does this mean for us? Well, one of the things it means is that just as my grandmother was the one who brought that light into the room to share with the rest of us, now we are charged with going out into the world to bring the light of Christ to others. Because there are people who are stumbling and lost and can't find their way where they're going. And they need the light. Now, sometimes our light doesn't feel very bright. Sometimes we kind of look negatively on ourselves, and we say to ourselves, well, I'm not that bright of a bulb. Well, actually, I usually say that differently in the way that means. Some of you get that. But usually we don't think we're being all that bright in the world. And what I tell people is this. I tell them the same thing that when we go back to the baptismal font and we baptize a child or an adult and we hand them this candle and we say, remember, all the darkness in the world cannot extinguish the light of a single candle. Which means as you and I go out from here tonight, it doesn't matter how dim we might feel. It could be the brightest thing somebody has ever seen. Because just as the light of Jesus Christ, when it comes into our dark places, reveals kind of our mistakes and our imperfections, it also reveals just how wonderfully we're made in God's image. It reveals our beauty in God's eyes. And if it reveals that for us, imagine what it can reveal for others who are in darkness and despair. So this evening, as we come together and we celebrate the birth of Jesus Christ, let's remember that when the light of the world came into the world, people were absolutely dumbfounded. They didn't know what to do with it. And in fact, I have to wonder about those shepherds who saw that light and went and saw Jesus for themselves. What were they thinking when they left and went back home? How had it changed them permanently? How has the light of Christ changed you and I permanently? So tonight, take the light with you. If you want to take that cup as an example of that light, take it with you and keep it on your bedside, on your shelf, anywhere you need a reminder that you are the light of the world. made in God's own image to be like Christ for others, so that no one may ever walk in darkness again. Amen.
Amen.